My house was the only dark one on the street, and that was how I knew the violation was fake before I even stepped out of the truck. Briar Creek Lane curved along the edge of Briarwood Crossing like a quiet ribbon of porch lights, sprinkler mist, glowing kitchen windows, and warm garage lamps spilling over clean driveways. Every house inside the subdivision looked alive, humming with evening routines, televisions flickering behind curtains, porch fans turning slow, landscape lights shining on trimmed hedges. Then there was mine at the end of the lane, sitting black against the trees like somebody had reached in and unplugged my life. The garage door did not respond when I pressed the remote. The porch camera blinked on battery mode. The well pump was silent. Even the low, steady hum from the freezer in the mudroom, the sound I never noticed until it was gone, had vanished behind the walls. I got out with my work boots hitting the gravel, and the night smelled like cut grass, warm transformer oil from somewhere down the street, and that faint electrical dust smell that only people who have spent years around panels know how to notice. I walked straight to the meter base with my flashlight in one hand and my tool bag still over my shoulder. A red utility disconnect tag hung from the meter collar, stamped temporary service interruption, and below it someone had taped a white notice from Briarwood Crossing Homeowners Association. Emergency electrical violation. Unsafe, unauthorized equipment. Suspected backfeed hazard. I read those words once, then again, and felt my jaw tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Electricity does not forgive guesses. My father taught me that when I was 12, standing beside him in a half-finished garage while he held up a yellow voltage tester and made me check the same circuit 3 times before he let me touch a wire. That tester was still in my truck console, scratched, faded, older than half the houses on this street. I had carried it through apprenticeship, licensing, master electrician exams, utility compliance work, and every service upgrade I had ever done by the book. And my own house was the cleanest job I had ever signed my name to. New 200 amp service, permitted. Generator transfer switch, inspected. Backup shed, set inside the setback. Panel labeled so neatly the county inspector joked it looked like a training manual. Nothing about my system was unauthorized. Nothing about it could backfeed into the grid unless somebody ignored the transfer equipment, and I had spent too many years preventing exactly that kind of danger to build it wrong at home. Then I heard tires on the pavement behind me. A white SUV rolled slowly past the subdivision entrance and stopped near the walking path. Janice Whitmore stepped out in a pale blazer, pearl earrings catching the streetlight, a glossy folder tucked under one arm like she had brought paperwork to a funeral. President of Briarwood Crossing, queen of violation letters, guardian of matching mailbox posts, and the woman who had spent 6 months calling my generator shed an eyesore because she could see the roofline from the path. She lifted her chin toward my dark house and said, "Mr. Holloway, maybe now you will understand why safety standards matter." I looked at the red tag, then at the notice with her association letterhead, then at the quiet black windows of my home. "Janice," I said, keeping my voice flat, "you just ordered a disconnect on the wrong house." She smiled like I had made a joke she planned to find me for. The board reported an emergency hazard. I reached into my truck, pulled out my father's yellow voltage tester, and held it in the beam of my flashlight. Then the board better have a county red tag, a utility authorization, and a real inspector's order. Her smile thinned. That was her first mistake. Thinking darkness meant I was powerless. Her second was picking a house owned by the man who used to investigate utility paperwork for a living. I did not touch the meter because that is how amateurs turn a bad night into a violation of their own. The red utility tag stayed exactly where it was, swinging lightly from the collar in the warm evening air, and I kept my hands where Janice could see them while the flashlight beam held steady on the seal. She was still standing by her white sport utility vehicle near the walking path, posture perfect, folder tucked against her ribs, trying to look like the adult in charge of a safety problem she had manufactured. Behind her, Briarwood Crossing glowed like a brochure. Matching porch sconces, trimmed hedges, sprinkler arcs catching the streetlights, little solar lamps along the path where residents walked dogs, and pretended my place was part of the scenery. My house had never belonged to that association. It sat on the old Holloway parcel, the last unincorporated lot at the end of Briar Creek Lane, with its own deed, its own utility account, its own driveway, and a tax bill that never once included Briarwood dues. I bought it because it was quiet, because the garage had enough room for my electrical bench, and because the trees behind the workshop blocked most of the subdivision noise. Then Briarwood expanded its walking path close enough for people to see the small backup generator shed I built beside the service wall. That shed became Janice Whitmore's personal obsession. First, she called it visually inconsistent. Then she called it an unapproved exterior structure. Then she called it a community concern. Each letter got more official looking and less connected to reality. I answered every one with the same packet: boundary map, deed, electrical permit, transfer switch inspection, generator installation approval, and a short line explaining that my property was not subject to Briarwood Crossing architectural rules. She ignored the deed. She ignored the permit. She ignored the inspection sticker on the panel. What she could not ignore was being told no by a house she thought should have been inside her control. "You were warned," she said across the dark yard. I turned the flashlight from the meter to the white notice taped below it. "This says suspected backfeed hazard." "That is correct." "Based on what inspection?" Her folder opened with a soft snap. "Based on documented safety concerns submitted to the proper utility channel." That sentence told me everything. She had not called the county. She had not called an electrical inspector. She had found a utility emergency intake form, dressed her complaint in safety language, and pushed hard enough that a crew followed protocol before anyone confirmed authority. I walked to my truck and pulled my permit binder from behind the passenger seat. Even in the dark, I knew every tab by feel: service upgrade, generator transfer, inspection record, utility correspondence, account authorization, parcel boundary. The yellow voltage tester rested on top, like a warning from my father. Electricity does not forgive guesses, and neither does paperwork when it is complete. My freezer was warming inside. My security system was bleeding battery. My well pump was silent. My garage door was locked down with my tools inside. But I still did not rush. I photographed the tag, the notice, the meter seal, the dark porch, the lit homes behind Janice, and her white sport utility vehicle idling beside the walking path. Then I started recording video. "Janice," I said, "for the record, did you personally submit this emergency electrical complaint?" Her smile returned, thin and practiced. "The board acted to protect the community." I nodded once. "That is not an answer." For the first time, she looked toward my porch camera, saw the red battery light blinking, and understood the darkness had not turned off the witnesses. "The first call I made was not to Janice, and it was not to the utility emergency number printed on the red tag. It was to my sister Claire, because Claire had been a paralegal long enough to know that the first hour after a bad document appears is when people either preserve the truth or accidentally bury it under emotion. She answered on the second ring, and before she could say hello, I said, "My power has been disconnected because Briarwood Crossing reported an emergency electrical violation." There was 1 second of silence. Then she said, "Do not touch the meter." I almost smiled in the dark. Already there. "Do not argue with the HOA president." Too late, but I am recording. Good. Send me photos, the tag, the notice, your permit file, and any camera clips. Then call the utility and ask for the compliance supervisor, not a general operator. Behind me, Janice's white sport utility vehicle idled near the walking path. Headlights low, exhaust drifting through the beam of my flashlight. She had stopped speaking, which meant she was either texting someone or realizing the conversation was no longer happening on her terms. I stepped inside the house and the darkness felt wrong in every room. A home without power has a different kind of quiet. The refrigerator does not breathe. The heating system does not click. The outlets are just blank faces on the walls. My flashlight crossed the mudroom freezer, the garage entry, the kitchen clock frozen at 5:17, and the framed photo of my father standing beside his old service van with the same yellow voltage tester clipped to his belt. I set my permit binder on the kitchen island and photographed every tab. Service upgrade approved. Transfer switch installed. Generator interlock documentation. County inspection passed. Utility approval letter. Account holder authorization. Boundary map showing the Holloway parcel outside Briarwood Crossing. I laid the yellow tester across the top page and took one more photo, not because the tester was legal evidence, but because I needed to remember the rule it carried. Do not guess. Measure. Verify. Record. The porch camera had already uploaded the first clip before the battery switched to low power mode. At 4:48 that afternoon, A utility truck pulled into my driveway. The crew supervisor, Tom Alvarez, stepped out with a tablet, looked at the meter, then spoke to someone off camera. Janice appeared from the edge of the frame in her pale blazer, holding her glossy folder like a credential. The audio was thin but clear. Tom asked, "Is there a county red tag or inspector order?" Janice answered, "The board filed the emergency hazard report. The equipment is unauthorized and unsafe." Tom hesitated. I could hear it in the pause. Utility crews do not like disconnecting service without clear authority, but emergency backfeed reports make people cautious because one wrong connection can put workers at risk down the line. That was why Janice chose that word. Backfeed. It was the kind of word that scares procedure into moving before truth catches up. I saved the clip twice and sent it to Claire. Then I called the utility and asked for compliance. The first operator tried to route me to outage reporting. I gave my account number, my service address, the red tag number, and said, "This is not an outage. This is a third-party requested disconnect on a private account, and I need to know who claimed authority." That changed the tone. After 7 minutes on hold, a woman named Dana Brooks came on the line. Her voice was calm, professional, and careful in a way I recognized from years inside compliance offices. I gave her the facts in order. She asked whether I had modified the meter, broken the seal, bypassed the transfer switch, or received a county electrical red tag. "No," I said, "and I have the past inspection record in my hand." Dana paused. "Mr. Holloway, please do not attempt reconnection." "I will not. I am opening a compliance review tonight. Can you email your permit and inspection documents?" I looked through the front window at Janice standing beside the only lit part of my yard, her phone glowing in her hand, my house dark behind the glass. "Already scanning them," I said. "And Dana, I have one question I want attached to the file." "Go ahead." I looked at the red disconnect tag hanging outside like a false verdict. Who authorized Briarwood Crossing to act on my utility account? The question sat on the utility line for a few seconds, and I could hear Dana Brooks typing before she answered. "Mr. Holloway, I cannot release the full complainant record until the review is opened, but I can confirm the report was submitted as an emergency safety concern by a third party claiming property-related authority." I looked through the window at Janice, her phone still glowing in her hand beside the walking path, and the darkness inside my kitchen suddenly felt less like a power outage and more like evidence. "Put this in the file," I said. "No homeowners association has authority over my account, my meter, my panel, or my parcel." Dana's voice stayed measured. "Send the deed and inspection record tonight. I will flag the account and request supervisor review before any further field action." That word, flag, gave me just enough room to breathe. Claire arrived 40 minutes later with 2 battery lanterns, a portable scanner, and a cooler full of ice because she knew my freezer was already becoming part of the damages. Janice was gone by then, but her notice was still taped below the meter, bright white under my flashlight like a lie that wanted to be official. Claire did not speak when she first saw the tag. She walked straight to the meter, photographed it from 3 angles, photographed the seal, photographed the notice, then stepped back and said, she used safety language because appearance complaints were not working. She was right. On the kitchen island, under lantern light, we laid out the last 6 months of Janice Whitmore in paper form. The first letter said my generator shed disrupted visual continuity along the Briarwood walking path. The second called it an unapproved exterior equipment enclosure. The third said residents had expressed concern about utility aesthetics near common areas. After I mailed back the deed, boundary map, permit, and inspection approval, the language changed. Unauthorized power equipment. Possible hazard. Suspected unsafe modification. Potential backfeed risk. It was the same complaint wearing heavier clothes. Claire tapped the final notice with 1 fingernail. She escalated from ugly to dangerous because dangerous gets faster response. I picked up my father's yellow voltage tester and turned it over in my hand. The plastic was worn smooth near the button from years of use. He had trusted tools because tools made people prove what they claimed. Janice trusted titles because titles made people hesitate before asking proof. At 7 the next morning, Paul Raines from County Electrical Inspection pulled into my driveway in a white truck with a county seal on the door. He was built like a refrigerator, wore a faded ball cap, and carried a clipboard that looked older than some inspectors. I knew Paul from my compliance days. He was not impressed by panic, polish, or homeowners association letterhead. Janice arrived 6 minutes later in her white sport utility vehicle, stepping out in a pale blouse and tailored slacks, as if she had been invited to supervise. "Inspector Rains," she said. "Thank you for responding to this community safety matter." Paul looked past her at me. "You requested inspection?" "Yes, sir. I have no county red tag, no failed inspection, and no unsafe condition I am aware of. Utility pulled service after an emergency complaint." Paul nodded and started where real inspection starts. Not with opinions, but with equipment. He checked the panel labeling, the transfer switch, the generator inlet, the grounding, the inspection sticker, the permit number, the distance to the shed, the meter seal, and the service disconnect. I opened nothing I was not allowed to open. I handed him every document before he asked twice. Janice stood near the driveway with her folder closed tighter every minute. Finally, Paul stepped back, clicked his pen, and looked directly at her. "Where is the county red tag you claimed existed?" The yard went quiet. Even the subdivision sprinklers across the lane seemed loud. Janice blinked once. The association reported a credible concern. Paul's face did not change. "That was not my question." He held up my inspection record. "This installation passed county inspection. I see no tampering, no bypass, no unsafe backfeed condition, and no county order supporting emergency disconnection." Claire's scanner beeped softly from the porch table, saving another copy of another truth. Paul turned toward the dark house, then back to Janice. "Homeowners Association letterhead is not an electrical finding." For the first time since my lights went out, Janice Whitmore had nothing bright to stand behind. Paul Rains did not leave after making that statement, and that was when Janice realized the morning was no longer a visit she could manage. He called the utility field office from my driveway, gave them his inspector number, my service address, and the permit record, then said in the dry voice of a man who did not enjoy repeating himself, "County inspection finds no unsafe backfeed condition and no supporting red tag. Restore should be reviewed immediately." Janice stepped closer, folder pressed to her chest. "Inspector, the association still has unresolved concerns about the equipment placement." Paul looked at the generator shed, then at the walking path across the lane, then back at her. "Equipment placement is not an emergency electrical hazard." Claire was on the porch with a lantern, scanning documents as fast as I could hand them over, and the little beep of her portable scanner became the sound of my patience turning into evidence. At 8:37, Dana Brooks from Utility Compliance called back. I put her on speaker so Paul could hear. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "we have opened the review. The disconnect was processed after an emergency submission from Briarwood Crossing Homeowners Association. The form identified the association as an authorized property representative." Janice's eyes flicked toward the road. I kept my voice even. "They are not. We are now aware of that dispute," Dana said carefully. "We have also received your deed, boundary map, permit file, and county inspection clearance. A crew supervisor is being dispatched to evaluate restoration." Paul leaned toward the phone. "This is Paul Rains with County Electrical Inspection. There is no failed inspection and no county order on this property." Dana thanked him, and those two officials speaking plainly over a dark porch did more damage to Janice than any argument I could have made. Around 10, Tom Alvarez arrived in the same utility truck my camera had captured the day before. He stepped out slowly, carrying a tablet, and looking like a man who had spent the morning learning his work order had been built on sand. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "I was told there was an imminent safety issue." I pointed to the porch camera, the red tag, the permit binder, and Paul standing beside the meter. "I know what you were told. I want to know who told you." Tom looked at Janice, and Janice immediately looked away. He opened his tablet and scrolled through the service record. "Emergency hazard report submitted through third-party property channel. Notes said unauthorized generator equipment, suspected backfeed, association-managed property, resident non-compliant." Claire stopped scanning. "Association-managed property," she repeated. Janice lifted her chin. "The property impacts the community." I picked up my father's yellow voltage tester from the porch rail and set it on top of the permit binder. "Impact is not ownership." Tom examined the meter seal, checked Paul's clearance, called his dispatcher, and finally removed the red disconnect tag. When the service came back, the house woke up in pieces. The freezer started first, a rough, low hum from the mudroom. Then the refrigerator clicked. The security panel chirped. The porch light flickered once and steadied. It should have felt like relief, but all I could think about was the spoiled food in the freezer, the backup batteries drained halfway down, the night my well pump sat dead, and the fact that Janice had used one dangerous word to shut off a house she did not own. Dana called again before Tom left. "Mr. Holloway, until this review is complete, your account is flagged against third-party homeowner association action." I looked at Janice standing under a street full of working lights, her folders suddenly useless in both hands. "Good," I said, "because the next thing I want is the original complaint form." The original complaint form arrived at 4:12 that afternoon, and I remember the exact minute because the freezer was humming again when the email hit my inbox. That sound should have been comforting, but after a night without power, it felt more like a witness returning to the stand. Claire was still at my kitchen island with her laptop, sorting receipts for spoiled food, battery reports from the security system, the utility red tag photos, and the county inspection clearance Paul Raines had signed before he left. The porch light was on again. The well pump had cycled twice. The garage door opened and closed when I tested it, but the house did not feel normal yet. Normal does not come back the second electricity does. Normal comes back when the person who pulled the wrong lever has to explain why her hand was on it. I opened Dana Brooks's email and downloaded the complaint file. The first page had Briarwood Crossing Homeowners Association letterhead at the top, Janice Whitmore's name under authorized submitter, and a checked box beside property. Representative. Claire leaned closer without speaking. The description field said unauthorized exterior generator equipment, suspected backfeed risk, resident refusal to correct hazardous condition, immediate disconnect recommended pending inspection. Under property status, Janice had written association-managed perimeter lot. I read that phrase 3 times while my father's yellow voltage tester sat beside the keyboard. Perimeter lot. That was how she had tried to blur it. Not member property. Not common area. Not private parcel. Just vague enough to sound official to someone processing an emergency report quickly. Then came the attachments. The first photo showed my generator shed from the walking path, cropped tight, so the setback markers and inspection sticker were out of frame. The second showed the side of my service wall, angled so the transfer switch label was unreadable. The third was one of my own old permit placards, but cropped so the approval number was missing. Claire exhaled slowly. She did not misunderstand this. She edited around the truth. Before I could answer, another email came in, this one from attorney Julia Bennett, whom Claire had contacted after the county inspection. Julia's message was short: preserve the form. Do not respond to the association directly. I am sending notice today. By 5:30, Julia had issued a preservation and demand letter to Janice, the Briarwood Crossing Board, the management company, and the utility compliance department. Preserve all emails, texts, complaints, photos, meeting minutes, violation records, board votes, invoices, and communications regarding the Holloway property, generator shed, electrical equipment, and utility disconnect. She also demanded written confirmation that Briarwood had no authority over my utility account and no right to represent itself as property manager for my parcel. Janice responded at 6:01 with a message copied to the board. She claimed the association acted out of an abundance of caution to protect residents from possible electrical hazards near common walking areas. Julia forwarded it to me with one sentence. Notice how she says possible now. That word mattered. Possible was not imminent. Possible was not inspected. Possible was not a county red tag. Possible was a guest dressed up as a reason after the power came back on. That evening, Earl Whitman from 2 houses over stopped by while I was labeling the file. Earl was 78, walked with a cedar cane, and had lived on Briar Creek Lane before Briarwood Crossing had a name. He looked at the generator shed, then at the lights glowing in my kitchen, and shook his head. Your father would have had words for anybody who touched a man's power without proof, he said. Then he handed me an old subdivision boundary notice from the first Briarwood expansion, yellowed at the folds, showing my lot outside the association line. They knew where that line was when they built the path, he said. I placed that notice beside the complaint form, the permit file, and the cropped photos. The pattern was not just paper anymore. It had shape. Janice had tried appearance letters first, safety language second, emergency reporting third, and when all of that failed, she started calling a private home a perimeter lot. She had not picked the wrong house because I was loud. She picked the wrong house because every wire, every permit, every boundary, every inspection, and every word she twisted had a record waiting in the dark. The original complaint form arrived at 4:12 that afternoon, and I remember the exact minute because the freezer was humming again when the email hit my inbox. That sound should have been comforting, but after a night without power, it felt more like a witness returning to the stand. Claire was still at my kitchen island with her laptop, sorting receipts for spoiled food, battery reports from the security system, the utility red tag photos, and the county inspection clearance Paul Raines had signed before he left. The porch light was on again. The well pump had cycled twice. The garage door opened and closed when I tested it, but the house did not feel normal yet. Normal does not come back the second electricity does. Normal comes back when the person who pulled the wrong lever has to explain why her hand was on it. I opened Dana Brooks's email and downloaded the complaint file. The first page had Briarwood Crossing Homeowners Association letterhead at the top, Janice Whitmore's name under authorized submitter, and a checkbox beside property representative. Claire leaned closer without speaking. The description field said unauthorized exterior generator equipment, suspected backfeed risk, resident refusal to correct hazardous condition, immediate disconnect recommended pending inspection. Under property status, Janice had written association managed perimeter lot. I read that phrase 3 times while my father's yellow voltage tester sat beside the keyboard. Perimeter lot. That was how she had tried to blur it. Not member property. Not common area. Not private parcel. Just vague enough to sound official to someone processing an emergency report quickly. Then came the attachments. The first photo showed my generator shed from the walking path, cropped tight, so the setback markers and inspection sticker were out of frame. The second showed the side of my service wall, angled so the transfer switch label was unreadable. The third was one of my own old permit placards, but cropped so the approval number was missing. Claire exhaled slowly. She did not misunderstand this. She edited around the truth. Before I could answer, another email came in, this one from attorney Julia Bennett, whom Claire had contacted after the county inspection. Julia's message was short. Preserve the form. Do not respond to the association directly. I am sending notice today. By 5:30, Julia had issued a preservation and demand letter to Janice, the Briarwood Crossing Board, the management company, and the utility compliance department. Preserve all emails, texts, complaints, photos, meeting minutes, violation records, board votes, invoices, and communications regarding the Holloway property, generator shed, electrical equipment, and utility disconnect. She also demanded written confirmation that Briarwood had no authority over my utility account and no right to represent itself as property manager for my parcel. Janice responded at 6:01 with a message copied to the board. She claimed the association acted out of an abundance of caution to protect residents from possible electrical hazards near common walking areas. Julia forwarded it to me with one sentence. Notice how she says possible now. That word mattered. Possible was not imminent. Possible was not inspected. Possible was not a county red tag. Possible was a guest dressed up as a reason after the power came back on. That evening, Earl Whitman from 2 houses over stopped by while I was labeling the file. Earl was 78, walked with a cedar cane, and had lived on Briar Creek Lane before Briarwood Crossing had a name. He looked at the generator shed, then at the lights glowing in my kitchen, and shook his head. Your father would have had words for anybody who touched a man's power without proof, he said. Then he handed me an old subdivision boundary notice from the first Briarwood expansion, yellowed at the folds, showing my lot outside the association line. They knew where that line was when they built the path, he said. I placed that notice beside the complaint form, the permit file, and the cropped photos. The pattern was not just paper anymore. It had shape. Janice had tried appearance letters first, safety language second, emergency reporting third, and when all of that failed, she started calling a private home a perimeter lot. She had not picked the wrong house because I was loud. She picked the wrong house because every wire, every permit, every boundary, every inspection, and every word she twisted had a record waiting in the dark. By the next morning, Janice stopped sending messages herself, and that told me the board had finally smelled liability through the perfume of authority. The new email came from Briarwood Crossing's management company, written in the soft, padded language people use when they want a disaster to sound like a scheduling error. It said the association regretted any inconvenience caused by a good-faith safety inquiry and hoped to resolve the misunderstanding without unnecessary escalation. Claire read it aloud at my kitchen island while the coffee maker clicked behind her and the freezer hummed like it was trying to remind everyone what had been taken. Inconvenience, she said, looking at the open receipts beside my permit binder. That is what they are calling a house without power, a dead well pump, a security system on backup, and a false emergency report. I did not answer right away. I was staring at the crop generator photos from Janice's complaint form. In the full picture, my shed looked ordinary, permitted, properly placed, with clean conduit, labeled transfer equipment, and the county inspection sticker visible near the service panel. In Janice's version, the same shed looked secretive because she had cut the truth out of the frame. That was the part that bothered me most. Not the dark house, not the spoiled food, not even the red tag. It was the patience behind the falsehood. She had stood on the walking path, chosen her angles, framed my home like a hazard, and then sent that version of reality to people trained to respond quickly. Attorney Julia Bennett called at 9:20 and told me the management company wanted a private call. No private call, I said. Written only. Julia gave a small laugh, not amused, just satisfied. That is exactly what I told them. At 10:46, Dana Brooks from Utility Compliance sent the next piece. The field review confirmed no active hazard at restoration, no customer request for disconnect, no county order, and no account authorization from any association or property manager. Then came the internal work note from the day the crew arrived. Customer unavailable, third-party representative on site, emergency community hazard reported, disconnect completed pending inspection. I read the phrase third-party representative until it felt like a fingerprint left on glass. Tom Alvarez had not invented that. Someone had presented Janice as having standing at my property. By noon, Julia had requested the communication trail from Briarwood Crossing under the preservation notice, and by late afternoon, a board member named Russell Keene made the mistake honest people make when they realize they have been used. He forwarded everything. There were messages from Janice to the board going back 3 weeks. He refuses to cooperate. The shed remains visible from the path. Utility concern may force. Compliance faster than legal process. Another said, if power company documents a hazard, removal becomes non-negotiable. Then the one that made Claire stop pacing. Schedule complaint while homeowner is at work. Avoid direct confrontation until utility has acted. The kitchen went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator cycle down. My father's yellow voltage tester lay across the binder, and for a second I could almost hear his old voice saying, "Do not guess." So I did not guess. I printed the messages, saved the files twice, and sent them to Julia, Dana, and Paul Raines. By 6 that evening, the Briarwood board had called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. Janice wanted it closed to residents. Julia replied that because association funds, management staff, and board authority had been used to interfere with a non-member private utility account, any discussion of settlement, reimbursement, and correction would need a record. At 7, I stood at my kitchen window and looked down Briar Creek Lane. The subdivision lights were coming on one by one, neat and golden along the sidewalks. My porch light came on too, steady above the door, shining over the red tag now sealed inside a plastic evidence sleeve on the table. Janice had tried to make darkness prove she was right. Instead, every light coming back on had made the paper trail easier to read. The Briarwood Crossing clubhouse looked brighter than I remembered, almost too bright, like every recessed ceiling light had been turned up to prove nobody inside was hiding anything. The room smelled like burnt coffee, floor polish, and printer toner. Folding chairs filled the center, residents lined the walls, and the board table sat beneath a framed photograph of the subdivision entrance where Janice loved to stand during holiday newsletters. She sat at the center of that table in a cream blazer, hands folded, face composed, with the same glossy folder beside her. I walked in with Claire on my left and attorney Julia Bennett on my right. I carried only one thing in my hand, my father's yellow voltage tester. The rest of the evidence was in Julia's binder, Claire's laptop, and 3 separate digital backups because after what Janice had done with crop photographs, I trusted originals more than speeches. Russell Keene, the board member who had forwarded the messages, would not look at Janice. That told the room more than his mouth could have. The management company representative started with a careful sentence about seeking clarity. Julia stood before he finished. Clarity is exactly why we are here. She connected her laptop to the projector, and the first image filled the wall. My dark house at the end of Briar Creek Lane, every briarwood porch behind it glowing. A quiet murmur moved through the residence. Then came the red utility tag. Then Janice's emergency violation notice. Then the utility complaint form with the box checked beside authorized property representative. Julia did not raise her voice. She did not need to. This parcel is not part of Briarwood Crossing. This account does not belong to Briarwood Crossing. No easement, covenant, management agreement, or owner authorization gives this association the right to request utility action here. Janice leaned toward her microphone. We acted because of a potential safety concern near a shared walking path. Julia clicked again. The county inspection record appeared, stamped passed. Then the permit. Then the transfer switch approval. Then the boundary map Earl Whitman had given me, showing the Holloway parcel outside the association line. The safety concern was investigated by the county after the disconnect, Julia said. No hazard was found. No county red tag existed. No inspector order existed. A man in the second row raised his hand. So why did the power company disconnect him? Julia clicked again. The cropped photograph appeared. My generator shed looked narrow, shadowed, suspicious. Then she clicked to the full photograph, where the setback marker, conduit, label, and inspection sticker were plainly visible. The room changed. People did not gasp. They did something worse for Janice. They went still. Claire stood and read the timeline. Appearance complaint, exterior equipment complaint, community concern letter, grants permit response, safety escalation, emergency utility report, disconnect, county. Clearance, restoration. Every date landed like a small weight on the table. Then Julia opened the board messages. He refuses to cooperate. Utility concern may force compliance faster than legal process. Schedule complaint while homeowner is at work. Avoid direct confrontation until utility has acted. Janice reached for her folder, but Russell finally spoke. Those are real. The management company representative closed his eyes for half a second. A woman near the back said, "Did our dues pay for this?" Another resident asked, "Are we liable if the utility sues back?" Someone else said, "He is not even in our association." That was when Earl Whitman rose slowly with his cedar cane. He pointed toward the projected boundary map. That house was never yours. Not when the path was built. Not when the first board was formed. Not now. Janice looked smaller beneath the clubhouse lights. Not sorry, just cornered by records she could not crop. I set the yellow voltage tester on Julia's table, right beside the red disconnect tag sealed in plastic. My father used to say electricity does not forgive guesses, I said. Apparently property records do not either. The meeting did not end when the room went quiet. It changed shape. Before that night, Janice had always controlled silence. She used it after issuing fines, after rejecting appeals, after reading rules in that polished voice that made ordinary homeowners feel small for asking ordinary questions. But this silence did not belong to her. It belonged to every person in that clubhouse who had just watched an emergency system get used like a private tool. Russell Keene stood from the board table and asked Julia, "What exactly is Mr. Holloway demanding?" Julia looked at me first, because good attorneys know when a client wants revenge and when he wants repair. I nodded. She turned back to the room. Full reimbursement for all documented losses, including spoiled freezer contents, temporary power equipment, inspection costs, legal fees, account protection expenses, and time-sensitive property impacts. A written correction to the utility company, the county, all residents, and the management company stating that Briarwood Crossing has no authority over the Holloway parcel or its utility account. Immediate withdrawal of every violation notice concerning his property. A board policy prohibiting third-party utility contact on any private account without written owner authorization. Preservation of all records. And a written acknowledgement that the emergency complaint was submitted without proper authority. The management company representative swallowed hard and wrote faster. Janice finally spoke. "You are making this sound intentional." Claire slid one page across Julia's table, and Julia projected it without a word. Schedule complaint while homeowner is at work. Avoid direct confrontation until utility has acted. The sentence hung over the room larger than any rule Janice had ever quoted. A resident in a navy cardigan stood up with a stack of due statements in her hand. "Madam President, did the board vote to do this?" Janice looked to Russell. Russell shook his head. "No recorded vote." Another board member, a quiet man named Peter Lang, leaned into his microphone. "I was told we were documenting an appearance problem for future discussion. I was not told a power disconnect was being requested." The room shifted again, not loud, just restless, chairs scraping, papers moving, neighbors turning toward one another as the story Janice had sold them came apart in public. Then Dana Brooks appeared on the speakerphone Julia had placed near the projector. Her voice filled the clubhouse, professional and controlled. "Utility compliance has flagged the HOA account. No future third-party association action will be accepted without direct customer verification. Our preliminary review indicates the emergency report contained an incorrect representation of property authority." Paul Rain spoke next from the back wall, still in his county work shirt, arms folded over his clipboard. "The county has no record of a failed electrical inspection at that address. The installation is permitted and passed. If anyone represents otherwise, they are not relying on county findings." Janice's folder stayed closed. That was the moment everyone noticed. The woman who always had a document. For every mailbox color, every fence stain, every trash bin schedule, had no document for the one thing that mattered. No easement, no covenant, no inspection failure, no authorization, no red tag. Earl Whitman tapped his cedar cane once against the floor and said, "A title does not make land yours." I looked down at my father's yellow voltage tester beside the red disconnect tag. It was strange how small both objects looked after all the noise they had carried into that room. One proved a habit of checking before touching. The other proved what happens when someone acts before verifying. Julia closed her binder and gave the board a deadline of 5 business days for written acceptance, payment arrangement, correction notices, and policy adoption. If they refused, the next documents would not be projected on a clubhouse wall. They would be filed in a courthouse. Janice rose like she wanted to leave with dignity, but the room no longer parted for her. Residents kept asking questions. Who paid for the complaint? Who gave the management company permission? Who would explain this to the insurer? Who else had been threatened with fake safety language? For the first time, Briarwood Crossing was not looking at my dark house. It was looking at the switchboard inside its own leadership, and every wire Janice had crossed was now labeled. The board accepted Julia's terms on the 4th business day, at 4:58 in the afternoon, 2 minutes before the deadline she had given them. The email came with 3 attachments, and for once, every sentence was plain. Briarwood Crossing acknowledged that my property was not part of the association. Briarwood Crossing acknowledged that it had no authority over my utility account, my meter, my electrical equipment, my generator shed, or my parcel. Briarwood Crossing acknowledged that the emergency complaint had been submitted without owner authorization and without a county electrical finding. I sat at my kitchen island with the porch light glowing through the window, my father's yellow voltage tester beside the laptop, and listened to the freezer hum in the mudroom like the house itself was breathing evenly again. They reimbursed the spoiled food, the battery backups, the inspection costs, the legal fees, the temporary equipment, and every documented expense Claire had put into the spreadsheet. They paid for a permanent utility account restriction requiring direct customer verification before any outside report could create field action at my address. The management company sent a correction letter to every resident, the utility compliance office, and the county. It said my installation was permitted, inspected, and outside Briarwood authority. No decorative language. No community concern. No soft little word like inconvenience trying to cover up the sound of a house going dark. The board also adopted a policy banning any officer, committee member, or management agent from contacting a utility provider about a private account without written owner authorization or a verified public safety order. Russell Keene resigned from the architectural committee, saying he should have questioned Janice sooner. 2 other board members requested an independent review of every enforcement action she had touched in the last year. Janice Whitmore was removed as president before the month ended. I was not in the room when it happened. I did not need to be. Justice did not require me to watch her lose the chair she had mistaken for authority. A week later, Tom Alvarez stopped by on his lunch break, not in an official capacity, just to say the utility had retrained its emergency intake team on homeowners association submissions and third-party claims. He stood by the meter, looked at the service wall, and said, "Your labels are better than half the commercial jobs I see." That made me laugh for the first time since the red tag. Paul Raines mailed me a copy of his final inspection note, stamped "No hazard found, no corrective action required." Dana Brooks sent the final compliance closure letter, and one line in it meant more than any apology. "Association letterhead does not establish account authority." I printed that line and slid it into the front of my permit binder. Then I cleaned the service wall, replaced the small weathered label on the transfer switch, and mounted a simple metal sign beside the meter where any person standing on the walking path could read it without stepping onto my property. No utility action without owner authorization. That evening, the same time my house had gone dark days earlier, I walked outside with my father's yellow voltage tester in my hand. Briarwood Crossing was glowing across the lane, every porch light neat, every sprinkler ticking, every window warm with ordinary life. My porch light was on too. The garage opened when I pressed the remote. The well pump kicked in after I turned the hose. The freezer hummed behind the mudroom door. I touched the tester to the known live outlet by the workbench, saw it glow, and thought about how close Janice had come to making fear look like safety. But fear needs people to guess. Authority needs people to stop asking questions. Records do not. Permits do not. Property lines do not. Electricity does not forgive guesses, and neither does justice when the circuit finally closes.